Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about the Paul brothers fight. What an interesting time to be a fight fan. We've made multiple podcasts about the Paul brothers' fighting career. We've talked extensively about Jake Paul's fight with Ben Askren. We talked about the fights before. We've talked about Logan Paul in numerous amounts of podcasts that we've done. But now we have Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather, which is going to be the biggest fight in Logan Paul's career. And I don't think it's going to get any bigger than this. Fighting the greatest boxer of all time, Floyd Money Mayweather, who for him, on multiple occasions, has called this legalized bank robbery, which is a funny way of putting this. Now, obviously, we know that Floyd Mayweather is going to destroy Logan Paul. There's not even a chance that I think Logan Paul has. But some people out there, albeit delusional or I don't know what it is, believe that Logan Paul has a chance in winning this fight. They say that his size might be a factor, the length, the weight. We just recently saw Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather weigh in at the unofficial weigh-ins, whatever they're called. And this is an interesting bout because this one's happening on Sunday, so we're getting this one on Saturday. And we saw them weigh in. Floyd Mayweather surprisingly comes in at the highest weight he's ever come into a fight. At 155, I believe. Logan Paul comes in at a ready 190, I think. I don't have these numbers in front of me, but Logan Paul is a big boy compared to Floyd Mayweather. But Floyd has talked about this multiple times, that it's not about the size, it's not about the reach. And it's not about that when you have someone of Floyd Mayweather's caliber, who I believe has been fighting for over 25 years. So you could have all the reach, size, advantage you want. But for someone who's been fighting as long as Floyd Mayweather has been fighting in the dominant fashion that he has done so, think about it. This guy has gone through, and his career ages perfectly. We see him defeat Canelo Alvarez. Some people say that he fought him too early in his career. We saw him defeat Manny Pacquiao, who is still fighting surprisingly, and going to be fighting for a title. So Floyd Mayweather's career is aging perfectly. And not a lot of people at the time when Floyd was going through his career, the 49 professional boxers that he fought, and then Conor McGregor, not a lot of people liked the way that he was going through everybody. But now that we're thinking about it in 2021 here, before this fight against surprisingly a YouTuber and Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather's career has aged perfectly. And it's the best case scenario for any boxer. Now, what's going on here is, I think it's just the opportunity came in front of Logan Paul, who heard that he could fight Floyd Mayweather, and he's just like, you know what? Let me just take this. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Not many people get this chance. And he has built his social media following to astronomical numbers. And that's what's giving him the ability to fight Floyd Mayweather in this fight. Now, what are some good outcomes that are going to come out of this fight? I think people are going to understand what it takes to be a world-class boxer, what's going to happen when people who think that they're boxers, which Logan Paul, compared to a normal person, he is a boxer. Like he trains, he's dedicated a lot of his time and effort into the sport of boxing. It's just that Floyd has this giant gap in front of him. Now, I'm going to repeat myself. I'm not saying Logan Paul is a guy just coming off the couch and fighting Floyd Mayweather. This is a guy that has the time, and let me put the exclamation mark on this, the resources to far exceed a normal person who's just coming off the couch. Logan Paul moved his camp to Puerto Rico, has an A+ trainer. You can see in his training style, you can just see in his physique, just the eye test alone, that Logan Paul is training really well for this Floyd Mayweather fight. Now, Logan Paul is always in peak physical condition outside of fighting and inside. We've seen him fight KSI, and he was in good condition. He looked like he had a good physique in that fight. I'm not saying condition, I'm saying physique here. So visually, Logan Paul looked like he was ready for a fight there. Now, I'm trying to think what Floyd is going to do in this fight, because he is able to do whatever he wants. Now, a lot of people are saying that, Floyd might knock him out and all this kind of stuff. You go through Floyd Mayweather's career, he doesn't have many knockouts. He had a couple in the beginning of his career. Then he had one against Ricky Hatton. He had one against Victor Ortiz. And excuse me if I'm forgetting one, but the Victor Ortiz fight was a weird scenario where Victor Ortiz was coming in, mind you, after headbutting Floyd multiple times in the fight, egregiously. And after that, coming in, and Floyd was getting really mad about it, so Victor Ortiz came in to give him a hug, and Floyd hit him with the 2-piece and knocked him out. So, and then the Ricky Hatton fight, I rewatched that one recently. What an amazing fight. That's one of my favorite Floyd Mayweather fights. It's just that, you got to have a dance partner when it comes to boxing, MMA, whatever it is, combat sports. You got to have a dance partner. Ricky Hatton was that dance partner who was just coming forward. It might have been his fans in the crowd egging him on, telling him to go forward. In the first round, the first or the second, Ricky got him with a nice shot, sent Floyd back, but then it was all Floyd Mayweather throughout that whole fight. And you could see Floyd in that fight do exactly what he's done his whole career. Digest the information that's being thrown at him, experimenting in multiple areas of the ring. You can see that the knockout shot that Floyd hit Ricky with, the TKO shot, excuse me, because Ricky got back up and then he got TKO'd. So at that time, Floyd kept on experimenting at the top right corner of the ring and throwing that shot, and then he got Ricky Hatton with it. So I think this podcast is going to be more, as you can tell, we're a couple minutes into this podcast. I'm not going to pretend that Logan Paul has a chance here. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on in terms of both of these fighters, what their mindset is. And I think for Floyd Mayweather, it's just a way to get another payday. He's talking about how this is gravy on top of, the real meat and potatoes that he's already created with his boxing career. And he's talked about how he's going to be making less money, but it's just such an easy fight for him that why not do it? For Logan Paul, I think we're going to talk about his brother later on in this podcast. But for Logan Paul, I think his boxing career he's trying to sprint through it. And I think Brendan Schaub talked about this in the weigh-in show. But I think that Logan is trying to sprint through his boxing career, get the biggest fights as possible, and really squeeze out the most juice. Now, his brother is fighting real fighters, not boxers, but real fighters. And we'll talk about him versus Tyron Woodley, which I think is a big step up in competition, especially coming from the Ben Askren fight. But I think Jake Paul is going in for the long haul. Now, multiple people are talking about Jake Paul signing with Showtime Boxing. Now, I don't know the details of that. I haven't done the research for that part, but if this is a multi-fight deal, then we know this guy's in for the long haul, and he's going to be fighting high-level competition, because after this Tyron Woodley fight, there's no backing down. Now, I think he could still fight MMA strikers. And what I mean by that is MMA fighters that predominantly uses their striking capabilities, which Tyron Woodley uses a lot of, even though of his wrestling background. Tyron Woodley always remained focused on attacking with that right hand, that bomb of a right hand. But I think Jake Paul is in for the long haul. He's ready to do what conventional boxers are doing and fight these fights. And I think give credit to Jake Paul. He's had this is a big step up in competition for him. And this is not the same thing as many traditional boxers do. Traditional boxers would never be on the main card on their third fight, fighting a 5-time world champion, albeit in the UFC, in the mixed martial arts space. But he's still a 5-time champion who relied on his hands. So let's get back to this Floyd Mayweather fight. Let's look at it. The next thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to this Floyd Mayweather Logan Paul fight was that I think that people that are casually tuning into this, I'm not saying casual fans, I'm saying people that are casually hearing about this and are going to tune in, not doing the research behind it, but this is an exhibition fight where no winner is going to be called out. Knockouts are legal, but it's 8 rounds. So this is not like a traditional boxing fight. And especially not being able to call out a winner at the end of the fight, it's giving me Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr. vibes. Look at that fight where Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. fought. Was it a barn burner? No. Was it two guys fighting each other and hitting to the body mostly and maybe a couple of shots to the head? Yeah, that's what it was more like. Now, I'm not saying that Logan Paul is going to go in there and not try and attack because of the opportunity presented in front of himself. He's going to attack. Logan Paul is going to attack, and I think that his game plan, even though he's talked about this multiple times of being the more technical fighter, which is delusional, and not just my opinion, I hope, and everybody's delusional to say that you're going to be a better technical fighter than Floyd Mayweather. But at the end of the day, Logan Paul is going to go in there and try his best. But don't be surprised watching this fight and thinking to yourself that it might be a little bit boring. We just don't know. It's an exhibition. We've seen these exhibition fights multiple times flop on us. Now, we do have some real fighters on this card. We have Badu Jack versus Carolina. And Badu Jack, I'm laughing because every time I see Badu Jack, he's on one of these cards. I think he was on the Conor Floyd card. He was on the Mike Tyson card, I believe. Badu Jack, this is his way of making money now. And He's doing really good at it. I think he was on the Jake Paul fight as well. He was on the undercard of the Jake Paul fight. But Badu Jack is all over the place. He's a fun fighter to watch. We got Jared Hurd, and that's going to be a fun fight. And I think we've talked about this multiple times, but why do we put real fights on these cards? Now, I'm not against it. I'm just trying to figure out why we do it. I think that Showtime and Triller and all these people, what they're trying to do is light a little bit of fire under these fighters and get them to do something special. And so that the Logan Paul fans come in and watch Badu Jack later on, watch Jared Hurd, watch Lewis, and then follow them in their career. Is that really going to happen? Are we going to get a lot of people that just tune in for the Logan Paul fight and Floyd Mayweather fight? Yeah, I think that's the case, but it doesn't hurt to show some real boxing capabilities on these types of cards. Now, opening up the main event, we got Chad Ocho Cinco versus Brian Maxwell. And man, this is a very interesting fight. Brian, BKFC experience, some pro boxing experience. This is not a guy you want to mess with. And it's a very tough fight for Chad Johnson. Very tough fight for him. And we'll see how he does. But he's talked about how during his football career, his Hall of Fame football career, he used to box to stay in shape. Chad Johnson looked like he was in phenomenal shape for the weigh-ins. This is also a contracted exhibition fight, so we'll see what happens here. But I think there's more of a chance here because of how game Chad Johnson looks to be, and Brian Maxwell with his experience. But we'll see. You know, we'll see. And even for this exhibition fight, we might get a knockout. We might see what happens. But I believe that we won't be able to find out who the winner is. But a very interesting fight. Very interesting fight. I think that Showtime's doing it right here. I think they got the right mixture of real fights compared with these YouTubers / ex-football players fighting. Funny enough, for the Chad Johnson fight, and I just want to bring this up, is that Chad was the one that brought Brian's name to the table and actually DM'd him on Instagram and asked him if he wanted to fight. Very interesting. Very interesting. And it shows you how game Johnson is to step his toes into the water of boxing. It's gonna be an interesting night of fights. These fights are all happening June 6th, Hard Rock Stadium, Miami Gardens, Florida. Start time at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Floyd has apparently personally himself told his team to make this pay-per-view $49.99. And that's all I really wanted to talk about when it comes to the Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather fight. Just to wrap that up, you know, I don't think there's no way that Logan Paul could win this fight. We've seen this multiple times in boxing. We saw Muhammad Ali go against in Japan. I'm forgetting the name right now, but against a wrestler. We've seen Mike Tyson come back and fight a real fighter in Royce Jones Jr. But this is not something that we think is ever going to stop in boxing because it's just happened forever. Why wouldn't you want to take a payday? Now, next, let's talk about Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley, announced for August 28th. We got a stare down. We got these guys jawing at each other. And what a step up, like I've said at the beginning of this podcast, what a step up in competition for Jake Paul, in my opinion. Tyron Woodley is no joke. But honestly, I think it is part of the cheat code and the recipe that Jake Paul is fighting is to get these MMA fighters into the ring and box them up. Now, do I think that Tyron Woodley has the highest chance out of all of them? Yes, I do believe that. And I think that Jake Paul knows that and we know this by including the automatic rematch clause if he loses. I was talking to multiple people about this fight, and we were talking about the stare down. And I think that Tyron Woodley was winning that stare down if you could give it points, which is not something I commonly do. But, these fights are unconventional, so we got to dissect them in unconventional ways. But I think Tyron Woodley was winning that altercation. But then Jake Paul pulled out the ace and told him that if he won, he would double his purse. If he lost, he would give his full purse to a charity of his choice. And Tyron Woodley completely ignored that. But let's look at this logically. Jake Paul focused his whole life into boxing. We have the technical capabilities that we've seen in a couple of his fights, obviously with lower competition. So we're not able to truly judge him. We saw him against an ex-basketball player. We've seen him against a YouTuber. We've seen him against a wrestler who fought in the UFC and has been a champion of multiple organizations. But we still don't know the true capabilities of Jake Paul, in my opinion, especially at the rapid pace that he's growing. Now, Tyron Woodley is coming into this not being a boxer, but being an MMA 5-time world champion. And I think he has the intangibles when it comes to this fight, being able to bite down on his mouthpiece and take shots and all that kind of stuff not really affecting him. Now, we saw in the latter half of Tyron Woodley's career where that kind of stuff looked like it was somewhat affecting him, meaning that he wasn't taking the same shots as he once was. He wasn't, whenever we saw him winning a fight, it was when he threw out all the technical aspects of his style out the window and just went all in. We saw that in the Vicente Luque fight. The beginning of the fight, I thought that Tyron Woodley was winning. Vicente Luque comes back, the killer that he is, and takes out Tyron Woodley. Now, the thing is that we've seen this so many times now, but I think we kind of get delusioned every time we see these MMA fighters step in to a boxing ring. I'm not saying against Jake Paul, because Jake Paul is not the top of the food chain when it comes to this kind of stuff, but we saw it in Conor McGregor. We saw it in Frank Mir versus I forget who he fought, but it was in the undercard of the Jake Paul Ben Askren fight. And we've seen it with Ben Askren. We've seen it a couple times now. Now, I bring up Frank, and I automatically think of his amazing dissection of his fight and what was going into his thought process when he stepped into the boxing ring with the professional. When he stepped in there, he talked about this. He saw so many openings for leg kicks, double legs, because that's ingrained in his mind. After the years of being an MMA champion, it's ingrained in his mind to see the feet spread out, seeing that lead leg, the ability of chopping that lead leg, the ability to take someone down or thinking about defending. I think in the Conor McGregor fight, Conor McGregor said, okay, now I only have 2 weapons to worry about. But we got to think about it on the flip side as well, is that your whole life you've been thinking about all 4 of your limbs being weapons and not being able to use them. Maybe that is somewhat of, it might be worse because of all the ingrained skills that you've had. yes, Conor McGregor was known for his hands and knocking people out, but he used his footwork in a way that wouldn't allow him to get taken down. He was using his leg kicks as ways to set up his hands, and taking all that away might be even worse. Now, Tyron Woodley, yes, he predominantly relies on his hands, but you got to think about it. At the starting of Tyron Woodley's career, people knew him as a wrestler. That was his background. And it was hard for people to take him down because of his grappling experience. Now, it might be even worse because he doesn't have those things to rely on. Tyron Woodley, when he fought Darren Till and he won the belt, yes, he was knocking people out all the time and he didn't really use his wrestling, but it was just knowing that Tyron Woodley has those capabilities. I think that helped him out a lot. Now, let's see in this fight. We'll talk about it more when we get closer to it. But I just wanted to give my initial thoughts about the fight because of how interesting it actually is. Big step up in competition for Jake Paul, which I've said multiple times on this podcast. But I'm happy for Tyron Woodley as well. You know, coming out of the UFC, a lot of people didn't really respect him as much as they should for being the 5-time world champion that he is. But now he's got the backing of the MMA community, most of the MMA community, and a lot of people just to see him knock out Jake Paul. I guess that's how much Jake Paul has gone under the skin of people. But it's fun talking about these fights. I think it's good to pepper these in every once in a while and, you know, just have some fun. We'll see what happens tomorrow, how Floyd Mayweather wins this fight. I'm not even going to talk about if Logan Paul wins this fight. If Logan Paul wins this fight, we're going to make a podcast and we're going to talk about how the world spun upside down. But we'll see how Floyd finishes this one. It'll be a fun night. And we'll talk about the UFC with Rosenstrike and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was fun talking about this. It's good to pepper these in, like I said. So thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. If you can like the YouTube video, if you're watching the YouTube video, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a comment below. Let's talk about this. And if you can listen to podcasts on the different podcast platforms, that'd be awesome as well. And yeah, if you want to get into contacts, there's email address all over the place. Let's chat. Let's talk about this kind of stuff. It's fun. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to me talk about the Paul brothers, and we'll talk soon. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. Bye.